One of the most important books of the last 100 years is a book that almost wasn't written. In 1941, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist living in Vienna and was finishing a book about what it means to live a meaningful life at the same time as the Nazis were implementing the final solution. As a doctor, Frankl was able to secure a visa to the United States, which he eventually tore up, remaining in Vienna, unable to leave his mother and his father behind. A year later, the family was sent to the camps where Frankl's father died in his arms. His mother and his wife were sent to Auschwitz, where they were murdered in the gas chambers. While in the camps, he had sewn into his coat the only copy of the book that he wrote before the war about living a meaningful life. That coat was, of course, eventually confiscated. It was destroyed. So night after night, Frankl would repeat to himself over and over again the passages from the book so it would not be forgotten. In 1945, after being liberated, Frankl sat down and wrote a new copy of the book. That book, titled Man's Search for Meaning, was published in 1946 and has sold 12 million copies. Frankl's message was that even in the most unimaginable suffering, pain, horrific circumstances, in our darkest and deepest moments, that we have the capacity to find hope. He said, "You do not have to suffer to learn, but if you don't learn from suffering, then your life becomes truly meaningless." The key, he said, is to imagine a better time, a reason to live. Quoting Nietzsche, Frankl writes, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." In other words, we survive life's greatest challenges by making sense of our suffering. Survivors, and not just survivors of the Shoah, survivors see life differently. Survivors live with the ability to zoom out that camera, that lens of life, an awareness of mortality, a knowledge that they will die, and the perspective that comes to us when we live with that knowledge. It's not morbid. It's not an obsession with death to think this way. It's a way to appreciate the scarcity of time that we are so hard trying to make the most of. This idea is the holiday season in a nutshell. Recall that our Torah reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah was the story of the near sacrifice of Isaac at the hands of his father Abraham. That story is about many things, but one of the lessons that I take from that narrative is how a single experience can transform our lives. And after an experience like nearly being sacrificed by your father, well, you just can't see things the same way. How could he possibly be the same person he was the day after that event? So the Torah tells us that while he and Abraham walked up the mountain together, and they were talking and they were having a nice father-son moment, but the next day, Abraham descends the mountain and Isaac is nowhere to be found. The rabbis want to know, where did he go? What happened to him? And to me, the most compelling answer is that Isaac was transformed by the moment when he saw his father raise up that knife in preparation to sacrifice his life. And a different Isaac walked down that mountain. An Isaac who was not altogether intact. He had been spared, and his response to survival was the full recognition of the preciousness of each and every moment of his life. Think for a moment about the rituals of this day The rituals of Yom Kippur, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg describes them as an attempt to harness death into a force for life. Traditional Jews put on a kittel, a white robe, similar to the shroud that we will wear when we're buried. The life processes of eating, drinking, washing, sexuality are stopped for 24 hours. And we have an encounter with the dead by reciting Yizkor in just a little bit, the memorial prayer. On Yom Kippur, Jews literally enact death by denying themselves the normal human pleasures with the goal of deepening our appreciation for life. And finally, there is the liturgy of these days, best exemplified by the Unatana Tokev and Musaf. We are put on trial. Our lives, metaphorically, are placed on the balance scales. God opens the book of our deeds, and a thorough assessment is made. You know the line. Who shall live and who shall die? How have we measured up? Have we been kind? Have we been truthful? Have we been honest in our business? Can you think of a more sobering message on this day? A better expression of the recognition that our lives hang in the balance, that each year we find ourselves back in this place, in our seats. We are survivors. And we look differently at the world because we understand the fragility of life and how it can be taken from us in a single moment. It forces us to ask ourselves, are we aware, are we grateful for the miracle of daily existence? And if life ended now, would it have been worthwhile? Who will live? Who will die? On March 28th of this year, this one line was very much on my mind. It was a Monday night. I was driving back from Westchester after having dinner with a couple of my kids, and as I was pulling into my garage, I started to have significant chest pain in my upper chest. I walked to my building. The pain remained steady. When I walked through the door, I told Allison how I was feeling. Her response was, "We are going to the ER." I said, "I have to call the cardiologist first." I called the cardiologist. His exact words were, "I always assume cardiac until proven otherwise. Get to the ER right now." I spent the night in the ER at Mount Sinai. Early indications from the blood work showed that there was some sort of cardiac incident. My doctors, who are amazing, and to whom I am deeply, deeply grateful, felt that an angiogram was the best course of action. By mid-morning, I am on the operating table being prepped for the procedure. The diagnosis was I had an 80% blockage in the widowmaker artery, right? To my cardiologist friends, that's the worst name for a diagnosis I've ever heard. It was like a ticking time bomb in my chest. They cleaned it out, they put in a stent, and by 5:30 that afternoon, I was on my way home. Better than I was before. Better. Faster, stronger. Right? I said this last night because I got some blank stares from kids of a certain age, parents, grandparents. Please explain the 70s cultural reference there. All right? In some ways, in many ways, the heart side of this experience was the easy part. I had a mechanical issue. They fixed it, and I emerged healthier than I was when I walked into the hospital the night before. But the head, the emotional side of this experience, making sense of it all, finding meaning in this, well, that's something entirely different. I eat well, I exercise, this shouldn't be happening to me. It was a weird coincidence that a few weeks before I was on the bus and some teenager offered me a seat, right? A sign of things to come. And yet there I was, asking myself, am I really better? Can I get back on the treadmill and not worry about dropping dead? Can I lift weight without worrying about collapsing? Will I be able to resume the pace of my life that I'm used to? Knowing that I got lucky, knowing that I could have been one of those people who had a massive heart attack and people would say, I never saw it coming. You don't emerge from that. You don't survive that completely unscathed or unchanged. Who will live and who will die? Those were the words going through my head over and over again. In the words of Frankl, you don't have to suffer to learn. But if you don't learn from suffering, then your life becomes truly meaningless. And in the immediate aftermath of the incident, I struggled to articulate what exactly I learned. In other words, there was nothing I knew when I left the hospital that I didn't know before I went into the hospital. I loved my wife and children the night before. I loved my dogs the night before. I value my life and my friends the night before. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe the process of making meaning after surviving one of life's trials isn't about discovering new insights that will change the world, and I would write a book, and I would hit the self-help lecture circuit. Maybe it is about recovering and retrieving that which we know is important, we know is sacred, but gets pushed down, buried amidst the busyness and the messiness as we travel through our lives. This is the season of memory. Rosh Hashanah is called Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. In just a few minutes, we will recite Yizkor. Actually, not a few minutes, but in a little bit later. I heard Rabbi Cosgrove say recently that if it's the time of remembrance, that means that something was forgotten. And perhaps what we forgot and need to remember is what we too often take for granted: the beauty of our lives and the preciousness of our existence. And that's what I remembered, and that's what I was reminded of the day I returned to the office in the aftermath of this cardiac incident. I walked down the hall where the rabbinic offices are. I passed a member of this community that I walk by every single time I walk in and out of my office, and I never really stopped to notice. Right outside our offices, it's been a while since some of you have been up there, but right outside the rabbinic offices is a picture of Rabbi Milton Steinberg, one of the greatest rabbinic figures of the 20th century, and of course, a former senior rabbi of this community who died in 1950 at the too young age of 46. And when I saw the picture that day, I remembered the sermon he delivered on Rosh Hashanah when he returned to the pulpit after suffering a massive heart attack not long before he died. The title of his sermon that year was "To Hold with Open Arms." And he too wrestled with the idea that we too often take for granted, the simple beauty of being alive. From 1950, these are the words of Rabbi Steinberg. I too have been indifferent to sunlight, how often preoccupied with petty and sometimes mean concerns, I had disregarded it. And I said to myself, how precious is the sunlight, but alas, how careless of it are men. How precious, how careless. This has been a refrain sounding in me ever since. It rang in my spirit when I entered my home again after months of absence, when I heard from a nearby room the excited voices of my children at play, when I looked once more on the dear faces of some of my friends, when I was able for the first time to speak again from my pulpit in the name of our faith and tradition, to join in worship of the God who gives us so much of which we are so careless. He continues, I wanted to say to husbands and wives who love one another, how precious is your lot in that it is one of love. Do not be even for a moment casual with your good fortune. Love one another while yet you may. And to parents, how precious is the gift of your children. Never be too busy for the wonder and miracle of them. They will be grown up soon enough and grown away too. Listen to these simple truths of life. The love of friends, the love of community, the love of a spouse, the simple gift of children. One would think that we wouldn't need to be reminded of these most precious gifts, that they are just self-evident. But if you speak to anyone who has survived, they will tell you the exact same thing. A couple months ago, I was sitting in the park with a member of our community who, at this time last year, was just diagnosed with stomach cancer. He had a long, long road of treatment and recovery and is now, thank God, cancer-free. And I asked him, I said, what did you learn from this experience? How are you different? What meaning have you discovered in this past year? And this is his answer. I'm done just going through the motions. I pinch myself multiple times each day to appreciate the place that I live, the craziness and diversity of New York City, the wonderful family and friends with whom I share my life, and all the beautiful things that surround me. I stop at the end of the day, of each day, and I smile. Now, this is a self-aware individual. He knew pre-cancer that these are the things that truly matter in life. And still, post-cancer, this is what he will double down on: family, friends, gratitude, the gifts of life. And I understand, because since I returned from the hospital on March 29th, among other things, I had been vigilant and disciplined about putting tefillin on in the morning, about praying and expressing gratitude for the gift of life. Modeh ani lefanecha, thank you, God, for the gift of my soul with an intensity that I haven't felt since I was a young rabbinical student. I need that experience in the morning because I know how easy it is for the muscle of gratitude and appreciation to atrophy. I'll give you one more simple truth I reclaimed in the aftermath of March 28th. While I was home recovering, I read a book titled Making Toast. It's a beautiful book written by Roger Rosenblatt, a well-published author and playwright. The book tells the story of how when his daughter Amy died from an asymptomatic heart condition, Roger and his wife, Ginny, moved in with their son-in-law and their 3 grandchildren, their young grandchildren. Long past the age of changing diapers and helping with homework, Roger and Ginny quickly adapted to their new roles, coordinating play dates, telling bedtime stories, talking about toys, dealing with the incessant questions that young children might ask. Roger and Ginny were reeling from their daughter's death, yet they carried on. They sustained each other, they sustained their son-in-law, and they cared for their grandchildren, guiding them through the pain and confusion of grief. Now, one of Roger's jobs was taking care of the one household duty that he mastered: preparing the morning toast just the way each child liked it, right? Hence the title of the book, Making Toast. And perhaps the most moving passage in the book is when Rosenblatt, who hardly did any writing in the aftermath of his daughter dying, describes one of the few essays that he did write during this time. It was a book review for the Washington Post. The novel was called Death Sentence by an author named David Lodge. It's about a retired linguistics professor, Desmond Bates, who is losing his hearing and who is also deaf to life. until, against his will, he visits Auschwitz, where the silence teaches him to hear. He reads a letter from a prisoner in the camp to his wife, discovered in a pile of human ashes. One sentence rises up to Desmond. If there have been at various times trifling misunderstandings in our life, now I see how one was unable to value the passing time. Rosenblatt writes, as far as I can tell, this is how to live, to value the passing time. Friends, by virtue of the fact that we are here today, that we have lived another year, we are all survivors. What will we do with this awareness? How will our lives be deepened and transformed by this knowledge? How will we value the passing time? When Rabbi Harold Schulweis became ill and reflected on the meaning of life, he wrote, "What and who and when is most important in your life? These questions call for revelation and for confessional." This moment, this hour, this day is most important. Do you know if you will ever have another one like this? And since we do not, let us not miss the opportunity of making the most of the time that we have, of the gift of life we possess, before it is too late. In just a few hours, we will step back into the world after the gates of Ne'ilah are closed. I pray that for you and your families, it will be a meaningful year, a year of retrieving some of life's most basic, most essential, most sacred truths. A year in which we all live with the awareness of the many gifts of our lives. A year of expressing gratitude in the morning for the breath of life. A year of recognizing the opportunities for love in our lives. A year in which we value the passing time with those who are most precious to us. And a year where we worry less about the length of our years and more about the possibilities of expanding the width and the depth of our days. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Thank you, God, for granting us life, for sustaining us, for keeping us alive, and for allowing us to reach this moment together. Amen.